Hey guys, Mr. Cannon. So hopefully a brief video here on some refreshers on price ceilings and price floors, which you should have most of the details, pros and cons in your government intervention graphing refresher. But I do want to cover some calculations. So for your notes, please make sure you have all the main bullets, and you can pause the video during those if you need to. And make sure you have the way to calculate consumer expenditure and producer revenue, which is a really simple process as well. And make sure you have the formulas, though. Again, they're fairly simple. So make sure you get all that, and make sure you have those in your notes. They are going to be due on the day, whatever day it says in the hub. Okay, so starting off, refreshers on graphing a price ceiling. So as you can see right here, we've got our price ceiling. Remember, it is below equilibrium, as when the government comes in and sets a maximum price. So you've got a ceiling. It is a little confusing because you'd think a ceiling would be above, but remember, price mechanism wants price to always get to equilibrium. And so the ceiling keeps things like in a normal room, it keeps things from going above it. So like a normal ceiling keeps things from going above it. A price ceiling keeps price from going above to equilibrium. So for it to be effective, it needs to be down here, right? It'd be like putting a ceiling below your floor. It's not doing anyone any good, right? Because things wouldn't be needing to get through there. Keep in mind that it results in a shortage, because as you can see on this graph right here, and we'll graph in a second, you've got at this below price, PC for P ceiling, or price ceiling rather, the first line it hits is our supply line, because at a low price, producers don't want to make as many goods because they're not going to make as much money. Yet when people start to see that the price got lower, their quantity demanded rises because of just law of demand, right? So it gets cheaper, they want to buy a higher quantity, but at that exact moment, the producers are also making a lower quantity of that good. So you see lines out the door, empty shelves, a bunch of people who want something, but not a lot of producers who are willing to sell at that price. So the new stuff would be, how do we actually do some calculations with that? Now, this is actually fairly simple. So if you look on the graph here, we've got our equilibrium price of 8, okay? 8 pounds. Pounds is in currency, not as in weight. So we've got our equilibrium price of 8 pounds and our equilibrium quantity of 20,000 units per week, whatever it is. So we have our 8 times 20, right? Now, if I wanted to figure out my total revenue at this time, this is the same as it's always been. It's just standard base times height, right? But if I want to figure out what's going on after the price ceiling, I'm doing this on the fly. If I want to figure out what's going on after the price ceiling, go over here and make that happen. Okay, so I've got total revenue of 8 times 20. Give me my line. There we go. Okay, so if I want to figure out total revenue before the price ceiling, I have my 8, I have my 20, I multiply that, I believe I get 160. So I would say total revenue before the price ceiling is 160 pounds. So that means that we are buying at 8 and we are buying and selling at 20. Now, that means that before the price ceiling, consumers are spending 160 and producers are receiving 160 because there's no government intervention, right? Now, when we institute the price ceiling at 4.5, so 4 pounds and 50 cents, right? That means that we are no longer able to buy and sell at 8. So all we do, this is all the calculation you need to do for this, is we figure out, okay, at 4.5, who's kind of interacting first? So if I follow the 4.5 across, boom, I hit my supply line. This means that at $4 or 4 pounds and 50 cents, producers are only willing to make 10 of this good, meaning there are only going to be 10 units on the shelves. When it's 4 pounds and 50 cents, there are only going to be 10 units on the shelf. So consumer expenditure here, are only going to be able to spend a total of 450. I'm sorry, 45. Hello. They're only going to be able to spend 45. Now, the government is not taking a tax in this scenario. The government's not providing subsidy in this scenario. So producer revenue in this scenario is also 45 because they are selling at 450 and receiving and selling 10. And so you're just multiplying, doing the exact same thing. So those are identical numbers for ceilings and floors because we've just decreased the number. Now, as we follow the 450 across, of course my phone's on, as we follow the 450 across, we see that technically at this price, consumers demand, what's this at, 30. So at 450, they technically demand 30, but there aren't 30 to sell them. So it doesn't really matter. They want 30 here, but they're only supplying a quantity, the producers are. They're only supplying a quantity of 10. So if I would say, how big is the shortage? Shortages of 10, 30, shortages of 20. So that's all the information I would need to know. When we take a price of 8 and we drop it to 450, we have a decrease of total revenue, producer revenue from 160, which is 8 times 10, so this old box, and it decreases to 45. So you could subtract that. I'm not going to do that on the fly, but you could subtract 160 minus 45. That is the difference in producer revenue, because they used to make this much, now they're making this much. Consumer expenditure is the exact same thing. They used to buy or spend this much, now they're spending this much. That's it. And you could subtract to find the difference, and again, it's going to be identical. And the only thing that's kind of different is just subtracting these two numbers. Quantity demanded minus quantity supplied will tell you what is our shortage, and obviously 30 minus 10 is 20. Okay. So if we go back to our next set here, let's go to price floors. So price floors are the same thing in reverse, right? So it's the minimum price of the good. And again, a floor keeps from going below it, right? So if I'm on the 4th floor and I'm trying to go below, I can go through the floor without a jackhammer. And so if equilibrium is here and price mechanism wants to get down to equilibrium, we need the floor to keep it from going below. So it needs to be above at PF to keep it from going below that price. So this would be a good example would be minimum wage, making sure that employers can't pay their employees less than the government sets at that time. It could be for industries that might be vulnerable, and so Great Depression with agriculture, they might say farmers need to at least get paid this much to keep eating, and so they might say you can't charge less than this, so that all companies are able to be viable for that. For pros and cons to that, obviously. Keep in mind that this sets up a surplus because at PF, we hit demand here. That means when it gets more expensive, consumers will slowly start to buy a lower quantity. But at the same time, producers go, oh man, that's kind of killer. I will slowly start to make more, but it doesn't really matter because here's our surplus, the distance between these two. Consumers are only going to buy QD. So this excess right here doesn't really do anything. They're just making more for no reason. The one thing I do want to key you into is this is flipped when we do labor. So if this is a minimum wage graph, if you think about me and HISD, technically for labor, I am the supplier. I am supplying labor, and HISD is the consumer of labor. So for minimum wage, if you were doing this, the suppliers are the actual workers. So as wages rise, more and more people go, I would get a job. I would get a job for that. The example I use in class is if I told you minimum wage was $4, how many of you would get a job? And it's like, okay, 2 people who are just like $4 is $4. But if I told you minimum wage is $30 an hour, I bet you more and more high schoolers would be willing to work. So as wages rise, the supply of workers rises, but simultaneously as wages rise, consumers, which in this case would be companies, are paying fewer and fewer employees because they can afford fewer and fewer employees. So somewhere in the middle is the sweet spot, but that's what would happen. That's why there's a surplus. Okay. Now for calculating that, let's move my head. For calculating that, we do the same thing. So we've got 20 times 60, which gives us 120. And so at equilibrium here, I'll do the same thing. We're doing this on the fly. We're doing it live. Okay. Donk, donk. I really hope you can't hear the drill in the background, but I'm sure you can. Okay. So if we are looking at our price floor, we're going green. If we are looking at our price floor, our equilibrium price here is 20. Our equilibrium price is 20, and our equilibrium quantity is 60. So before the price floor, you might say our consumer expenditure is 20 times 60. So that gives us our consumer spending 120. And you would say our producer revenue is also 20 times 60 because they're keeping everything in this case, right? Now, if we set a price floor, we are keeping prices from going below this point here, below 25. And so what we're really saying is that we have set a new minimum. So you can charge anywhere above this price, but you cannot charge below this price. So if we follow this along, what we have is PF follows along, and then boom, at this high price, we are only demanding a quantity of 40. And so if I can show you this, what's on my mind? On my mind is I'm getting a calculator. Okay, so if we're trying to find after the price floor, what are consumers spending? Okay, well, they are spending $25 a unit, and they are buying 40 units. And so our consumer expenditure after the tax, after the price floor, excuse me, is 1,000. If I'm looking at producer revenue, well, they used to make down here, they used to make this 120, excuse me, 20 by 60, excuse me, this 120. But now they're making this. Boom, 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 boom. This whole box here, right? Because that is the new quantity that's being demanded and the new price that's being sold at. So their producer revenue would be identical. Now, there, I do that math right? It doesn't matter. You get the idea. Their new producer revenue would be changing from the initial as well. So they used to make 20 per unit and sell 60 units. Now they make 25 per unit and sell 40 units. Okay. So we've got that. Now this sets up a surplus because technically at this price, suppliers wish they could sell 80, but simultaneously consumers are like, nah, at 25, we're only going to buy 40. So they went down from 60. So you have 80 minus 40, and you have a surplus of 40, meaning suppliers are really excited about this price of 25, but at the exact same time, consumers are buying fewer, and so you have 40 extra units on the shelf. And that's all you would need to know, the difference between early consumer expenditure and late consumer expenditure. Now, how do we know how big the surplus and shortage is? Well, we've got an example here. Remember that our supply and demand functions, the purpose of them is to say if I plug in a price, a quantity comes out of that price. If I plug in a quantity, a price comes out of that quantity. And so all we have to do is take our new price ceiling and figure out what it looks like in these functions. So I've got a random function here, and I'm going to say that we have whatever the equilibrium price is here. I think it's 20, it doesn't matter. But I'm going to set my equilibrium price here, and let's imagine that we have a price ceiling. So we have a maximum price of 12 bucks. So I can figure out what my quantity supplied is going to be and what my quantity demanded is going to be by plugging in 12 into each of these functions. So if I have my quantity demanded equals 60 minus 2, and then I plug in 12 for my price, I get 24. If I multiply 2 times 12, and then I get 60 minus 24, and that gets me my new quantity demanded of 36. So 60 minus 24. So my demand, my consumers at this low price will now demand 36 units. Nice. If I do my quantity supplied is negative, there we go, negative 20 plus 2p. That p I plug in for 12, so that gets me 24 plus negative 20. That gets me 4 as my quantity supplied, which is a bummer because at this low price, consumers are willing to buy 36 because they're stoked about how cheap it is. But at that same low price, my producers are only willing to make 4, meaning I have a distance of 4 and 36, meaning I have a shortage of 32 units. So 36 people at this price will show up to the store and they will be 32 units short and 32 people sad. And that's it. So if I have my equilibrium price, I can just take my price floor, plug it in, and I can tell you exactly how big or small the surplus or shortage are. Okay, so that's the idea. Make sure you have all those examples in your notes. Next class, you will be, that's Monday and Tuesday. Next class, you will be expected to be able to practice that. It won't take the entirety of the class, and then you will move on to calculating subsidies, and we will be blackjack dealer done with government intervention. Okay, thanks, y'all.